We know that sleep is important, but a lot of us do not realize how sleep affects our memory. And you might be surprised to find that sleep loss has been linked with memory disorders like Alzheimer's. And we have evidence that people get sleep disturbances several years before any symptoms of Alzheimer's. So that means that a lack of sleep or disturbances in your sleep can either be a predictor as an early warning sign or even a contributor to diseases like Alzheimer's. Also, sleep has been shown to be important to our memories both before and after we learn something. So I'm going to go over all of this in more detail and how you can actually use this knowledge in your day-to-day life. So make sure you stick with me. So first of all, how does your sleep and your memory work? You've probably heard of the different stages of your sleep cycle, right? You have REM sleep and you have non-REM sleep. So your REM sleep is called your rapid eye movement sleep, and that is where most of your dreaming occurs. And the reason it's called rapid eye movement is because your eyes are literally darting back and forth when you're in this stage. And the other phase of sleep is your non-REM sleep. And like the name sounds, it's where your eyes are not darting back and forth. So each of your sleep cycles are broken down into about 90 minutes. And they'll involve some NREM sleep and some of this REM sleep. So your sleep cycle will start with your NREM sleep, and it'll start to get deeper and deeper. So your NREM will have 4 different stages, with stage 1 being the lightest sleep and stage 4 being the deepest sleep. So in stage 4 NREM sleep, it's going to be really hard for you to wake up, versus in stage 1, it's going to be a lot easier for you to wake up. And then it'll transition into REM sleep, which is completely different, and that is where a lot of your dreaming occurs. So each of your different sleep stages have their specific brain activity, they have specific muscle activity, specific eye movement activity that's all associated with it. And you can measure this using something called a polysomnograph. And if you look at a polysomnograph, you can see different sleep waves for all the different sleep stages. So if you look at someone's brain activity and you look at it during your deep NREM sleep, for example, that is called your slow wave sleep. And the reason is because the electrical signals from your brain are these really slow but really large amplitude waves. They kind of look like tidal waves on a polysomnograph. Now, REM sleep, on the other hand, is very similar to you being awake. It's very erratic, and you cannot predict this type of brain activity. Now, the interesting thing with these two sleep stages is that the ratio of your NREM to your REM sleep will change throughout the night. You won't have an even ratio. So for example, in the beginning part of your night, you're going to have a lot more of this non-REM sleep. So you're going to have hardly any REM sleep in the beginning part of your sleep. And then as the night goes on, you're going to get less and less of this deep NREM sleep, and you're going to get more and more of this REM sleep. So that the last 2 hours of your sleep, that's when a majority of your REM sleep is going to be. So you might wonder, why is our sleep like this? Why isn't our sleep really even? So that in case someone gets woken up early, or if you were a hunter-gatherer back in the day and someone came to try to attack us and we woke up, at least we would get an even amount of all these other sleep stages if we had to wake up a little early. Well, scientists are still trying to figure out a perfect explanation for this, but different scientists do have different theories as to why your sleep is broken down like this. So one theory that makes a lot of sense to me is by a sleep researcher named Matthew Walker. So he says that this uneven back and forth nature of your sleep is needed to properly wire your brain. And this will also help properly store all the memories in your brain. So in other words, your brain has a limited amount of storage. There's only so many neural connections and only so many neurons that are available. So this uneven amount of sleep throughout the night will help us weed out certain information and also make room for newer information, and also weed out less important information and make more room for more important information. And this is where your NREM and your REM sleep are so important when it comes to memory. Both NREM and REM sleep are very important when it comes to memory, but they both have very specific different functions. So your NREM sleep, which dominates more early, is really important for pruning off information. So it's basically like a filter, and it'll filter out any unnecessary information. And what's left after your NREM sleep, your REM sleep will take all that necessary information, all that important information, and it'll make all these connections with it and turn it into more general knowledge. So in other words, your REM sleep is left with these networks of information, and it will decipher a meaning as a whole combining all that information. So this could help explain why REM sleep dominates later in the night, because first you need your non-REM sleep to filter out any unnecessary information, and then once you have all that necessary info, now your REM sleep can come take over. So this kind of puts into question people who do not get a full 8 hours of sleep every night. People who say they can only get by on 6 hours of sleep. And they always set their alarm 2 hours earlier so that they wake up on time. So that person might feel fine and that they're only cutting out 25% of their sleep. But how much sleep are they really cutting out? Because it might be 25% of their total amount of sleep. But when you look at the REM sleep, they're actually going to cut out between 60 to 90% of their REM sleep. And this works both ways too. So for example, let's say you typically go to sleep at midnight and you wake up at 8 a.m. Instead, if you wake up at 6 a.m., now you're going to shortchange a lot of that REM sleep. But instead, if you go to sleep 2 hours later, and now you go to sleep at 2 a.m. and you wake up at 8 a.m., you're going to get enough REM sleep, but now you're cutting out a lot of that non-REM sleep that you're going to get in the early parts of the night. So this is one of the reasons why it's so important to stay consistent in your sleeping times. And that if you feel sleepy, to really avoid pushing yourself to stay awake. And also to give yourself enough time where you can get those 8 hours of sleep. So how exactly does your sleep play into your memory? Well, every time you go to sleep, it essentially refreshes your brain and makes room for new memories to come in. Basically, the way that your memory works is as you're awake throughout the day, you're getting all this new information. And all this information is going into your hippocampus. That is a region in your brain. And your hippocampus is important for short-term storage of your memories, but it cannot retain this information for a long period of time. And also the other problem with your hippocampus is that it has a limited storage space. So if you overwhelm it, either you're going to overwrite other important information, kind of like a camera roll or something like that, or you're just not going to be able to take in all the information. So what happens is when you go to sleep, it basically refreshes this and it makes room in your hippocampus for newer memories to occur again. And what studies are showing is as someone goes to sleep, your brain will basically shift this information from your hippocampus to a more long-term storage center, which is in your cortex region of your brain. And this is how you basically free up information in your hippocampus, and you also store your memories into a more long-term storage center. Basically, you can think of your hippocampus as this tiny USB stick, and you can think of your cortex as a large external hard drive. And this is where you can start to use this knowledge to help you throughout the day. So one way this can help you is by napping. So one study was done and it was looking at daytime naps, and it was looking at healthy adults, and they were separated into two groups, either a group that napped or a group that did not nap. And they wanted to see, first, if they learned something, then later in the day, if their learning capacity was improved after they took a nap. In other words, they wanted to see if they were able to learn new things better if they had napped earlier in the day. So the study was done at noon, and the participants had to look at 100 pairs of people's faces and their associated name. And then later in the day, the participants had to do another round of the same type of learning. But in between them, either one group would stay awake the whole time, and the other group actually took a 90-minute nap. And what they found is the group that stayed awake throughout the whole day, they actually had a much worse learning capability compared to the group that napped. So when you look at the group that napped, they actually had a 20% increase in their learning ability compared to the group that stayed awake. So researchers were also looking at people's brain waves during the study, and they found that this memory refreshment was specifically related to your stage 2 NREM sleep. So if you remember from before, your stage 2 NREM is not your deep sleeping stage. That's actually more on the lighter sleeping side. And specifically, this memory improvement was associated with things called sleep spindles. Sleep spindles are basically these really powerful bursts of electricity on people's brain waves. And what they found is the more sleep spindles someone had, the more their ability to learn the next time around was. So if you had more sleep spindles, it was easier for you to learn new things. So this is just a side note, but another cool function of your sleep spindles are that they can protect your brain from external sounds. So the more powerful sleep spindles that you have, the harder it is for you to wake up from external sounds. Now, another cool thing that these researchers found was they found these pulses of brain activity that would go between your hippocampus and your cortex. And this is what they realized was basically your brain was transferring this information from your hippocampus, or your short-term storage center, to your cortex, which is again your long-term storage site in your brain. And this is how people would wake up and they'd be more refreshed and able to learn new information because their hippocampus would be clear of any information. So now if you look at someone who's struggling to learn new information, this could be an explanation why. If they're not able to generate enough sleep spindles, they're probably going to have a harder time learning the next day. And this is exactly what happens with seniors. Seniors have a harder time generating sleep spindles than younger, healthier people. And again, there have been studies showing this as well. So they took senior citizens and they checked their sleep, and they found that the fewer amount of sleep spindles they saw in these elderly people, the harder it was for them to learn new information the next day. So this is one key thing that you can start to do, which is to start improving the amount of sleep spindles that you're getting every single night. But how can you do that? Well, you get the most concentration of your sleep spindles in the last 2 hours of your sleep cycle. So know that I mentioned that your last hours of your sleep is associated with more REM sleep. So basically how it works is towards the end of your sleep, you have these long bursts of REM sleep, but then in between those bursts of REM sleep, you have these very short bursts of deep NREM sleep, but those bursts of NREM sleep have a ton of sleep spindles. And those last 2 hours are very key to getting enough of those sleep spindles. So this can be a real challenge for people, for example, in high school or different types of schooling where they have to wake up really early. Because a lot of times what happens is these people cut out those last couple hours of sleep. But those last 2 hours are the most crucial to get enough of those sleep spindles and improve your ability to learn. If you're someone who's sleeping 6 hours or less, and specifically if you're going to sleep at a normal time but you're waking up 2 hours early, then you are shortchanging yourself of a lot of these sleep spindles and a lot of your ability to learn the next day. So if you want to improve your ability to learn and make new memories, it's really important to make sure you get those 8 hours of sleep and that you're not forcing yourself to wake up early. I know this can be really hard if you have to go to school or you have to go to work and you're basically forcing yourself to wake up early every single day. I know this is exactly what happened to me when I was in high school. I never was getting enough sleep. But now that you know this information, maybe you can restructure your sleep a little bit so that you're making sure you get those 8 hours. So knowing all this, we can clearly see that sleeping before you're gonna learn something is extremely important. And it's gonna make you a lot more efficient when you're actually learning. So next time you're studying for an exam or studying for a final or anything in general that involves learning, make sure that you're getting enough sleep beforehand, because you might be putting in all those hours of hard work and you're definitely going to be dedicated, but it doesn't mean that your brain is actually able to process all that information. Now, at the same time, sleep is also very important after you're going to learn something. So the way to think about this is sleeping before learning something is basically refreshing your brain, but sleeping after learning something is kind of like hitting that save button on your computer. And there have been a ton of studies that show that sleeping after learning something actually improves your memory retention. So the earliest study that we know of dates back to 1924 with 2 German researchers, John Jenkins and Carl Dallenbach. So basically what they did is they took these participants and they had them learn this list of random facts. And they either had them stay awake or they had them get a full night, 8 hours of sleep. And they wanted to see how quickly and how much information they would forget over those 8 hours. So they found some interesting results. The group that stayed awake the whole time, they had this initial decline in their memory, but then that decline wouldn't stop. It kept accelerating the whole amount of time. But the group that went to sleep after learning, they had that same initial decline, but then it kind of staggered off. So they had that constant level of memory even after that initial decline. And basically what they found is the sleep was helping cement a lot of those memories that people learned. And the interesting thing here is that same group that stayed awake, after they went to sleep, they found that their memory actually improved. And tests like this have been repeated many times throughout the years. And what all these studies are showing is the memory retention benefit you get from sleeping is about 20 to 40%. So in other words, people who go to sleep after learning something, they're able to remember things 20 to 40% better than people who stay awake after learning. So again, if you are someone that has to study for an exam or study for your finals, etc., you can use a lot of this knowledge to your advantage. You can see that, first of all, sleeping before you're going to learn in the first place, you're going to be able to cram all that information in a lot better. But then sleeping after, you can see that this information is not only staying in your brain, it's going from an area of short-term storage to your area of long-term storage. This is how you can most efficiently cram in all that information into your brain, both sleeping before you're going to learn something and also sleeping after you learn something. And it doesn't always have to be a full 8 hours of sleep. Even short naps for up to 20 minutes have been shown to improve your learning ability. Now, we can also take this a step further, and we can see which specific sleep stage or sleep phase is most important for your memories. So we all know that your different sleep cycles and sleep stages are super important. But when it comes down to learning new memories and cementing those memories in your brain, where specifically in your sleep cycle is it most important? And how do we make sure we're getting enough of that? So researchers started looking at this in the early 2000s. So basically what they did is they had people look at a list of facts and they had them sleep for half of the night. They either had them sleep in the first half of the night or the second half of the night. Now, if you remember from what I said before, your first half of your night is dominated by your NREM sleep, and your second half of your night is dominated by REM sleep. Again, REM sleep is where most of your dreaming occurs, and your NREM sleep has those 4 different stages, where it goes from stage 1 to stage 4, with stage 1 being your lightest sleep, so it's basically easier for you to wake up, and stage 4 is your deepest sleep, so it's harder for you to wake up. And again, no matter what, if you sleep later than you normally do in the night, no matter what, you're going to be missing out on that NREM sleep. At the same time, if you wake up earlier than you normally do, no matter what, you're going to be cutting out on that REM sleep. Now, what these studies found is for these types of memories, for your factual-based information, the studies are pretty clear that your NREM sleep, specifically your deep NREM sleep, is the most important when it comes down to these types of memories. So the more deep NREM sleep a person got, the more their ability to remember things were the next day. So the people that were sleeping in the first half of the night did a lot better than the people sleeping in the second half of the night. So if you're trying to cram for a big final exam and you're wondering, should I sleep at midnight or should I sleep at 4 a.m.? Should I stay up those 4 hours throughout the night or should I just wake up really early and start studying before my exam? It's probably better to make sure you get those first 4 hours of sleep so that you can help cement a lot of those memories that you've already been studying the whole time. These studies that people were looking at were so accurate where they didn't even have to look at anything else. They just had to look at your brain activity. And all they had to see was how much deep NREM sleep were you getting. And they could use that number to basically see how much information you would remember the next day. That's how accurate this is. And researchers also looked at the MRI scans of people, and they wanted to see where this information was getting drawn from. So they looked at people's brains before they slept, and they saw where that information was coming from. And they also looked at the people's brains after they slept. What they found is, before people went to sleep, they would retrieve their information from their hippocampus. Now, if you remember, your hippocampus is basically your short-term storage center in your brain. So anytime you're awake and you're getting new information, it's going into your hippocampus. And after people went to sleep, again, they looked at the MRI scans and they found that it was coming from their neocortex. Now, your neocortex makes up about half of your brain, and this is basically the top part of your brain. And this is where your long-term storage of your information will occur. So after you're going to sleep, this information is traveling from your hippocampus to your neocortex. It's basically going from your short-term storage to your long-term, more stable storage. Now, the other cool part about this, again, is you are freeing up your hippocampus when you do this. So when you go to sleep, your information that's traveling away from your hippocampus frees up that short-term storage so that you can store new information. So again, if you're that high schooler that's trying to cram for an exam and you're cramming all night, you go to sleep at midnight and you get those 4 hours of sleep, at least you're getting that deep NREM sleep where you can cement all those memories you've learned so far. And also you're clearing out your hippocampus where you can learn new information if you have to start studying at 4 in the morning again. Now, ideally, you would study in advance and not have to cram so much last minute. But at least you can use this to help you out a little bit. Now, this cycle of information going from your hippocampus to your neocortex happens every single night. Every single night, your memory architecture in your brain is changing ever so slightly when you're sleeping. Now, even daytime naps have been shown to improve your memory, as long as they have enough of your NREM sleep. So you don't need a full 90-minute sleep cycle. Even a 20-minute nap can improve your memory. Now, what about things that aren't facts? So there's other types of memories too, like motor skills, or for example, people learning an instrument, or riding a bike, or playing a sport, etc. So sleep can help a lot with those as well. Those are what's called your muscle memories. Now, obviously, your memories aren't stored in your muscles. Your memories are still in your brain. So there was a study kind of showing this. So they took these people who were right-handed, and they had them learn a number sequence on a keyboard. So it's kind of similar to learning a piano. They had to learn this random number sequence, and they basically practiced it for a total of 12 minutes. And they wanted to see both how fast they could do this sequence and how accurately they could do this sequence. So half of the people, they learned this in the morning and they stayed awake, and then they practiced it later in the evening. And the other half learned it in the evening, and then they went to sleep and they practiced it the next morning. And what they found is the group that stayed awake, they had no improvement in their performance. But the group that slept after learning, they actually had a 20% improvement in their performance speed and a 35% improvement in their performance accuracy. And also, the group that did stay awake, they actually showed improvements in their accuracy after going to sleep the next night. So even after staying awake, then when they went to sleep the next morning, they still showed improvements. And what this shows is your brain will continue to work on and improve your motor skills while you're sleeping, but it will not do this when you're awake. And another cool thing that these sleep researchers found is there were specific transitions where it was particularly difficult for people. So for example, if they had to type the number 4134, sometimes the transition from 4 to 1 could be really difficult for them at first. But after they went to sleep, those specific difficult transitions actually improved a lot. So your brain, somehow when it was sleeping, was able to rewire itself and plan for these different difficult transitions, where simply going to sleep made it easier for you to do the next day. So if you've ever tried to learn a new instrument, or you try to learn a new tune or a new beat or a new note, etc., and you find it's a little difficult at first, and then you go to sleep and you wake up the next day and you try practicing it again, and you notice that you're able to play it a lot better, this can help explain why. I know this has happened to me before. And again, this is also linked with your NREM sleep. Now, specifically, this is linked with your stage 2 NREM sleep. So if you remember from before, that is not so deep in your sleep stage. It's more on the lighter sleep stage side, but nonetheless is still part of your NREM sleep. Now, specifically, this type of motor learning happens most in the last 2 hours of your sleep. Now, more specifically, that has to do with your sleep spindles. If you remember, I mentioned this before, your sleep spindles are these electrical bursts of activity that occur in your brain. And the more sleep spindles someone has, the more their learning ability is. And you get most of these sleep spindles in the last 2 hours of your sleep. So normally, your last 2 hours of your sleep are dominated by REM sleep. And then in between those long bursts of REM sleep, you have these short bursts of NREM sleep. But those small bursts of NREM sleep have a lot of those sleep spindles. So those last 2 hours are really super important as well, because they have a lot of those sleep spindles, which will improve a lot of your learning. Because again, more sleep spindles means more learning ability and also improved memory. And it doesn't just have to be those last 2 hours of your sleep. Even daytime naps can have a lot of these sleep spindles as well. And daytime naps have been shown to actually improve your motor abilities as well. So one person who practices this is Usain Bolt. Usain Bolt has practiced taking naps a few hours before breaking world records or doing different races, and other athletes have practiced something similar as well. Now, I know I talked a lot about NREM sleep, but I don't want to take anything away from your REM sleep. Your REM sleep is also very important for different reasons. So first of all, like I said, you get most of your sleep spindles in those last 2 hours of going to sleep. And those last 2 hours of sleep are also where you get a majority of your REM sleep. So if you're missing out on that REM sleep and you're missing out on those last 2 hours of sleep, you're also missing out on all those sleep spindles. And also, like your NREM sleep is important for factual information, your REM sleep is important for more general knowledge, because your NREM sleep, like I said, is important for pruning off unnecessary information. So you have all this flooded information in your brain, your NREM sleep selects specifically what is important, and then your REM sleep comes in and it starts making connections, and it starts getting the whole meaning as a whole from all this information. And it's not just general knowledge, your REM sleep is also really important for creativity. So when you're asleep, specifically when you're in REM sleep, your brain is able to make these very unique connections that it would probably not be able to make when you're awake. And this can have major improvements in your problem-solving abilities. And we have heard many stories of people who have had these great inventions or these great discoveries because they had a dream about it. So one example of this is the periodic table of elements that was discovered by Mendeleev. So Mendeleev claimed that he discovered how to organize this periodic table of elements because he saw it in a dream. He saw how all these elements were arranged perfectly by their weight, by their electronic activity, etc. And when he woke up, he wrote it all down. And he said there were basically only a couple alterations he had to make. Now, I don't know how true that story is. It was recounted by him, but nonetheless, he had a dream about it, and that is how he was able to organize that whole periodic table that we still use today. And it's not just crazy inventions like that. Even singers and songwriters have found that they, in their dreams, are able to come up with a new tune that they would never have thought of when they were awake. So this can be really hard to test because you cannot test someone when they're in REM sleep and ask them to solve some sort of problem or come up with a new musical tune, etc., because they're asleep. But researchers still try to do this. And the way they try to do this is by testing people in the first 90 seconds after they wake up. Because once you wake up, your brain activity doesn't all of a sudden turn to you being awake. You still have a few minutes of where your brain activity is still in that sleep limbo state. And what the researchers thought was if they wake someone up in REM sleep and they test them right away, they force them to take a test. I'd be pretty annoyed if someone woke me up and they forced me to take a test or solve a problem, etc. But that's exactly what they did in this study, where they tested them in the first 90 seconds after being awake. And they were comparing people both when waking up from NREM sleep and also REM sleep. And there was also a control group of people being awake the whole time. And what researchers did was something called an anagram test. So basically they had all these lists of words and all the words were scrambled. So all the letters were scrambled up and they had to basically unscramble them and find out what the word is. So one example of this is if you wanted to come up with the word cow, if you saw the letters W-O-C, you had to rearrange that to cow, C-O-W. Now they weren't that easy. All the words were 5 letters long. And they wanted to see how many words that these participants could unscramble in those 90 seconds. And what they found is people, when they woke up from NREM sleep, really struggled doing these puzzles. But after waking up from REM sleep, the participants were able to solve a lot more puzzles. So they were able to solve about 15 to 35% more puzzles compared to people that woke up from NREM sleep or were awake the whole time. So what we can take away from this is both your NREM sleep and your REM sleep are super important. While one is more important for factual information, the other one is way more important for creativity and a lot of stuff we still do not know about. We just know that we need to get both of these phases of our sleep. So in a nutshell, it's really important to make sure you make enough time to get those 8 hours of sleep every single night. It's really easy for people to be apathetic towards sleep. If you tell your boss that you didn't sleep well last night and you're really tired, he'll probably tell you to go drink some coffee and get back to work. But that's the reality that most people are facing. Out of all the developed nations across the world, 2/3 of adults are failing to get the recommended